Clayton Harlow had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, crushed rivals with a single call, and built a skyline that bore his name. But nothing prepared him for the moment a dirt-covered little girl tugged on his sleeve and whispered, "That phone isn't yours." What he heard when he pressed play would unravel everything he thought he knew, including the secret his dead brother took to the grave. The glass doors of the Philadelphia Tech Pavilion slid open with a soft hiss as Clayton Harlow emerged, flanked by his assistant Megan O'Neill and two sharply dressed security guards. The late afternoon sun cast a golden sheen across the pavement, glinting off his Italian loafers. His posture was firm, his stride purposeful, his face unreadable. As the billionaire CEO of Harlow Properties, Clayton was no stranger to attention, but today he didn't smile for the cameras or acknowledge the passing handshakes. Something was off. He reached into his blazer pocket out of habit, searching for the familiar weight of his phone. Nothing. He checked the other pocket. Still nothing. He stopped walking and turned to Megan. "My phone," he said sharply. "It's gone." Megan's eyes widened. "Gone? I saw you with it during the keynote." "I had it when we left the booth," he muttered, already patting down every pocket. "Check the GPS now. It's an encrypted model. If it's in the building, I want it back in 5 minutes." Megan immediately tapped into the company's security tracking app while the guards scanned the sidewalk. Clayton, increasingly irritated, stepped away toward a less crowded side street, muttering to himself. That phone had everything: sensitive documents, private recordings, and proprietary architectural blueprints not yet released to the public. But more than that, it held the last voicemail from his brother Mason, left 10 years ago, a message he could never bring himself to delete. Just as he turned the corner, he saw a hunched man in a faded hoodie hurrying away, clutching something sleek and dark in his hand. It caught the sunlight, just enough to look familiar. Clayton took a step forward, but before he could call out, a small voice behind him made him stop cold. "Sir, that phone isn't yours." He turned around. Standing there was a little girl, no more than 7, with tangled dark curls and large brown eyes that seemed far older than her years. Her pink jacket was torn at the sleeves, and her shoes were mismatched. One sneaker, one sandal. She looked nervous, but her voice was clear, steady. She was pointing to the man walking away. Clayton blinked, thrown off by the sheer oddity of the moment. "What did you say?" She stepped closer. "That phone you're looking for?" He took it. "But you shouldn't just get it back." Her gaze sharpened. "You need to press play." "Press what?" "There's something recorded. Mommy said if I got the phone back to a man named Harlow, I should tell him to listen." Clayton's jaw tensed. "What's your name?" "Ivy," she said softly. "My mommy's name is Alyssa. She said he would come." Clayton's head spun. Who was this child? Why did she know his name? And what did Alyssa have to do with any of this? Behind them, Megan's voice cut through the static in his mind. "Mr. Harlow, we've got a ping. North Alley, moving fast." But Clayton didn't move. He looked back down at the girl, who was now clutching a threadbare stuffed bear under her arm. "Please," she whispered. "If you don't listen, she'll die." In all his years of ruthless business dealings and impenetrable logic, nothing had ever frozen Clayton like that moment. He didn't understand what was happening, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something beyond control and calculation. He felt fear, and a strange, unshakable urgency. Clayton didn't wait for security. He moved quickly, eyes locked on the man in the hoodie who was about to disappear around the corner. The city noise dulled behind him as adrenaline surged in his chest. He closed the distance in long, silent strides. "Hey!" he barked. The man flinched and broke into a run. Clayton gave chase, his polished shoes slapping against the pavement. The guards were still catching up, but he was fast for someone in a tailored suit. The alley turned into a narrow corridor between brick buildings, dumpsters lining one side. The thief tried to vault over a crate, stumbled, and the phone went skittering across the ground. Clayton didn't hesitate. He lunged, snatching it up before the man could recover. Security tackled the guy seconds later, pinning him to the wall. "Let him go," Clayton said breathlessly, still staring at the phone in his hand. "Sir?" one of the guards asked, stunned. "He's just a runner," Clayton muttered. "Not the point." Back at the sidewalk, Ivy hadn't moved. She stood there, hugging the worn bear, eyes wide. Clayton returned, the phone in his hand, and knelt down to her level. "This phone? You're sure it's the right one?" She nodded. "That's the one Mommy used." He turned the phone on. It was indeed his. His security credentials opened it immediately. But something was wrong. There was a new folder in the audio files labeled IVY. The first recording was time-stamped from 3 nights ago. His finger hovered over the play icon. Something in his gut clenched. He tapped it. A woman's voice crackled to life, panicked and strained. "If anyone finds this, please listen. My name is Alyssa James. I'm being held, I don't know where. They have my daughter. Her name is Ivy. We tried to run. He caught us. I don't know how long we have left. But if anyone out there knows Mason Harlow, tell him Alyssa's still alive. Tell him I never stopped loving him. Please, help us." The message ended in a static pop. Clayton couldn't breathe. The name hit him like a freight train. Mason Harlow, his younger brother, dead. 10 years ago, Mason's car had gone off a cliff near the Delaware border. Police said it was an accident. No body had been recovered, but Clayton had believed them. He stared at the girl. "You said your mom told you to find a Harlow?" Ivy nodded again, solemn. "She said Uncle Mason would come, or his brother." He ran a hand down his face, stunned. "Did she tell you who I was?" "She said you were rich. You would know what to do. But she said if I found you, I had to get that phone back, so you could hear." Clayton stood slowly, phone still in hand. The voice on the recording echoed in his head. Alyssa. She was real. And somehow connected to Mason. Megan rushed over, breathless. "We have the guy in custody. Want to press charges?" Clayton's voice was low. "Number, let him go. But I want facial recognition, traffic cams, everything. Find out who gave him the phone. This was no random theft." Megan looked confused, but obeyed. As Clayton turned back to Ivy, he realized she was trembling slightly in the cool breeze. He pulled off his suit jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders. "Come with me," he said. "We're going to figure this out." For the first time since his brother's funeral, Clayton Harlow felt something stir in his heart, a question he never thought he'd ask again. What if Mason wasn't dead? Clayton ushered Ivy into the back seat of his Escalade, its leather interior far too pristine for the child who now sat clutching a worn bear and looking out the tinted windows like she'd never been in a car this clean before. He gave her a bottle of water, which she accepted with both hands, sipping carefully, as if rationing. She didn't ask questions, didn't complain, just watched everything quietly, her small legs swinging above the floor mat. Megan sat in the front seat, throwing uneasy glances at the rearview mirror. "Clayton," she murmured, lowering her voice, "what are we doing? We don't know this girl. You're letting her into your car? Into your life?" "She knows Mason's name," Clayton said flatly. "And she had my phone, with that recording. But she could have been coached. She knew things no one else should know," he snapped. "She said Alyssa told her to find a Harlow. Alyssa, from the recordings. This isn't random, Megan." Silence fell between them. Megan turned her head to look out the window, frowning. Clayton leaned toward Ivy gently. "Can I ask you something, Ivy?" She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." "Do you know where your mommy is?" She looked down at her lap, then up at him with wide eyes. "Number, but I know she's somewhere bad. She said they might move her again. She said if I ever got away, I should find someone with the last name Harlow." Clayton's heart ached. "How did you get away?" Ivy hugged her bear tighter. "There was a man who came sometimes and gave food. Mommy whispered to him when the other man wasn't looking. I don't know what she said. But the next night he left the door open a little. I ran, but I got lost, and then someone stole her phone." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She just stared out the window, small and guarded, like she'd grown used to holding in every emotion. Clayton reached for the phone again, scrolling through the folder labeled IVY. There were more recordings, many of them. He hesitated, then clicked the next one. Alyssa's voice returned. Ivy, if you're hearing this, it means you got out. I'm so proud of you, baby. You're so smart. Don't trust anyone unless they say the name Harlow. If you find Mason or his brother, tell them I'm alive. I never died in that fire. They lied. Clayton's eyes widened. What fire? Megan turned around slowly. What's she talking about? I don't know, he muttered. We were told Mason's girlfriend died in a cabin fire a week before his car accident. No one gave a name. I never questioned it. I didn't even know he was dating someone seriously. He looked at Ivy. Your mom? Was her name Alyssa James? Ivy nodded. That's what she writes on papers. Clayton sat back, stunned. Alyssa James. A name from 10 years ago, buried in the rubble of Mason's final days. Had Mason faked his death? Or had someone silenced him for digging too deep? He opened the next file. It was a man's voice this time, low and threatening. You don't make the rules. You're alive because we say so. One more move and your daughter disappears next. The air in the car turned cold. Ivy curled into the corner, silent but visibly trembling. Clayton's voice dropped. Get me Landon, now! Megan already had her phone out, dialing. Clayton turned back to Ivy. You're safe now. I promise. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded and leaned against his arm. For the first time, she let herself rest. Clayton looked out at the city skyline. Someone had lied to him for a decade. Someone had buried his brother's truth. And now, a little girl had unearthed it with a whisper. By the time they reached Clayton's penthouse, the city skyline had shifted to evening hues. The elevator ride up was silent, broken only by the soft sound of Ivy's breathing as she dozed lightly against his side, the stuffed bear still clutched in her arms. Clayton had never brought a child into his home, let alone one possibly connected to the darkest mystery in his family's past, but something about her presence felt necessary, as if this girl had walked straight out of a forgotten chapter in his life and refused to leave until he faced it. The elevator opened to polished marble floors, modern furnishings, and cold luxury. Too sterile, Clayton realized now. Ivy blinked in awe at the tall windows, the lights of Philadelphia glowing below them like stars flipped upside down. But she didn't smile. She didn't ask for toys or sweets. She simply stepped out, small and quiet, and stood still, as if unsure whether she was allowed to breathe. Ivy, Clayton said gently, kneeling to her level. You can take off your shoes. You're safe here. No one will hurt you. She glanced at him, uncertain, then slowly obeyed, stepping out of her mismatched shoes and placing them side by side near the door. Clayton felt a strange ache watching her movements, so careful, so rehearsed, like a child raised not in a home, but in survival mode. Megan brought a glass of milk and some warm soup. Ivy ate slowly but without hesitation, as though used to food being temporary. When she was done, she whispered, "Thank you," and then added something that twisted Clayton's stomach. "I won't take up much space." He stood in the hallway afterward, speaking in hushed tones with Landon Price, his private investigator and longtime friend. Landon had just arrived, files under his arm, laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "I ran background checks on Alyssa James," Landon said. "She disappeared 10 years ago, officially presumed dead in a cabin fire near Mason's last known location. No body recovered. Sound familiar?" Clayton nodded grimly. "Too familiar." "Get this," Landon continued. "The land where that fire happened belonged to a holding company. Guess who owned that company?" Clayton's stomach sank. "My father." Landon gave him a knowing look. "Before he died, he had dozens of shell companies. Some real estate, some darker. That cabin? It was off-grid, unregistered, wiped clean." Clayton's mind reeled. His father, Gerald Harlow, had been ruthless in business, always working behind the scenes. But to cover up a death? "I also analyzed the metadata on those recordings," Landon went on. They weren't made on your phone. They were uploaded remotely. Alyssa must have hidden a device on her end. But the audio was routed to your phone using a piggybacked file sharing app. That's how the man who stole your phone got it. He was after the recordings. Why target me now? Because someone figured out she was still alive. And if she's alive, so is the evidence. Clayton turned to look at Ivy, who now sat curled under a soft blanket on the couch, eyes fluttering closed. They were going to kill her just to erase the truth. There's more, Landon said. One of the voices on the recordings, you wanted it analyzed. I ran voice matching. The threatening voice from File 4? His name is David Merle. He used to be an enforcer for your father's old security firm. Disappeared after Mason's death. Clayton's face darkened. So my brother didn't just die. He was eliminated. Looks like it. The room felt colder now. The penthouse lights seemed too bright, the view outside too fake. Everything in Clayton's carefully curated life had started to unravel because of a girl with a whisper and a phone full of ghosts. I want them found, Clayton said. All of them. I want Alyssa back, and I want the people who did this to answer for it. Landon nodded. I already traced the signal from Alyssa's last message. The location pings to a warehouse district outside the city. We'll move tonight. Clayton walked back into the living room and knelt next to Ivy again. She opened her eyes sleepily. Do you think we can find her? She asked. He brushed a stray curl from her forehead. Yes, and we're going to bring her home. For the first time since she entered his life, Ivy let out a breath and smiled. Small, hesitant, but real. And in that moment, Clayton felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about truth anymore, it was about redemption. The moon hung low over the edge of the city, casting pale light across the broken rooftops and rusted fences of the warehouse district. Clayton sat in the back of an unmarked SUV beside Landon, watching the GPS pulse with a small red dot that hadn't moved in hours. The last audio message from Alyssa had been traced to a specific location, a warehouse surrounded by chain-link fences and stacks of discarded crates. Ivy stayed behind at the penthouse with Megan and a private security detail. She had begged to come, but Clayton refused. He wouldn't put her in danger. Not again. Landon clicked through thermal scans on his laptop. There's at least 3 heat signatures inside. No exterior guards, no vehicles parked near the door. Either they're hiding, or they think no one's coming. They don't know I'm not my father, Clayton muttered. They think I'll look away. Let it rot. Landon checked his sidearm. We do this clean, quiet. I don't want to spook whoever's watching her. We get in, get Alyssa out, and call in the feds once we're gone. Clayton nodded, jaw tight. His hands were shaking, just barely, but it wasn't fear. It was rage, barely leashed. All these years, he'd believed the story, that Mason had died in a tragic accident, that Alyssa had perished in a fire, that their ghosts were just chapters in a closed book. But now those lies were unraveling fast, and he was walking straight into the pages that had been ripped out. They parked behind a neighboring storage facility and moved on foot. The night air was cold and sharp. Their boots made almost no sound on the gravel. Landon led the way with practiced precision, keeping low, scanning every shadow. Clayton followed, his heart pounding harder with every step. He wasn't trained for this kind of operation, but he didn't care. This wasn't business, it was family. They reached the side entrance. Landon picked the lock in seconds. The metal door creaked open, revealing a dark corridor that smelled of oil and dust. They moved fast, hugging the walls, stepping around broken pallets and oil drums. A dim light flickered at the end of the hall. Then they heard it, movement, a shuffling noise, a cough. Landon held up a hand, signaling stop. He pressed his ear to a steel door and mouthed, "Two inside." He looked at Clayton. "Your call." Clayton hesitated for only a second before nodding. "We go." Landon kicked the door open and swept in with his gun raised. The room was dim, lit by a single bare bulb overhead. 2 men were caught mid-conversation. One reached for something under the table, but Landon was faster. "Don't!" he shouted. Hands where I can see them. Both men froze. Clayton stepped in behind him, heart in his throat. Then he saw her. In the far corner of the room, barely visible behind a wall of crates, was a woman chained to a pipe, arms limp, head down. Her hair was matted, her skin pale and bruised, but it was her, Alyssa, Clayton whispered. Her head lifted slowly. Her lips trembled. Mason? No, Clayton said, moving toward her. It's me. I'm his brother. She blinked, disoriented, then her eyes widened with recognition. Clayton. Landon kept his weapon trained on the two men, while Clayton knelt and began working at the cuffs with a key he found on one of the guards. We've got you, he said gently. You're safe now. Alyssa collapsed into his arms, too weak to stand. Ivy, where is she? She's safe, Clayton said, voice shaking. She got out. She found me. She saved you. Tears streamed down Alyssa's face. She made it? She's waiting for you. Landon called it in. Police were already en route. Clayton didn't look back. He wrapped Alyssa in his coat and carried her out of that nightmare. As they stepped into the night, the air felt sharper, cleaner, like the past was beginning to exhale. Behind them, sirens echoed through the warehouse maze, growing louder. But Clayton heard only one thing clearly. Alyssa's weak voice whispering, "Thank you," as she buried her face into his chest. Alyssa didn't sleep the entire ride back. Wrapped in a heavy wool blanket in the back seat of the SUV, she clutched a water bottle with trembling fingers. Her cheeks were gaunt, her skin bruised and scraped, but it was her eyes that haunted Clayton the most. Wide, alert, disoriented, as if she still hadn't fully registered that she was free. She flinched at every sudden sound. The engine shifting gears, a siren in the distance. Even the soft hum of Landon's phone vibrating made her tense. Clayton sat beside her, unsure how to offer comfort. She'd spent years in a cage, one he hadn't known existed, and even now, with the doors flung open, she hadn't stepped into the light yet. Ivy, she whispered suddenly, almost as if she doubted she had really said the name. You're sure she's okay? She's safe at my place. Watched over, federal, warm. She asked about you the whole time. Tears filled Alyssa's eyes, but she blinked them away. She got out. She actually made it. She was the one who found me, Clayton said. She brought me back the phone, told me to press play. I almost didn't, but she made sure I listened. Alyssa let out a soft, broken laugh. She was always stronger than me, smarter too. I kept thinking, if I just held on long enough, someone would hear us. Clayton hesitated before asking, was it Mason who helped you before he disappeared? Alyssa's breath caught. She closed her eyes. Mason didn't disappear. He was taken, like me. He tried to get us out. He found out what your father was doing, about the properties, the shell companies, the blackmail. He confronted him, and then he vanished. I think they took him out there to silence him. Clayton's hands clenched into fists on his knees. I believed it was an accident. I believed everything. That was the plan, she said. To make you believe. You were the only Harlow still in the spotlight. They needed you clean. Clayton's voice was quiet. And you? They tried to burn you alive. I was supposed to die in that fire. But someone warned me. One of Mason's contacts. I ran. I hid. But they found me again 6 months later. And this time, I had Ivy. Her voice cracked. Ivy was born in hiding. She never had a home, never saw the outside world until she escaped. Clayton's throat tightened. I swear to you, Alyssa, this ends tonight. Not just for you, for Mason, for Ivy, for every lie my father paid to bury. She looked over at him then, eyes bloodshot and wet, but steady. You're not your father, Clayton. You were always different. That's why Mason trusted you. The SUV pulled into the underground garage beneath Clayton's penthouse. Landon opened the door, and Clayton helped Alyssa out carefully, her legs still weak. She leaned into him with surprising familiarity, as if her body remembered trusting Mason and instinctively reached for his brother. As they stepped into the elevator, Alyssa asked softly, Does she know? She knows you're alive, but I didn't tell her about everything. I wanted you to be the one. The elevator doors opened to the penthouse. Ivy was waiting on the couch in a fresh pair of pajamas, holding her bear. The moment her eyes met Alyssa's, she dropped the bear and ran. "Mommy!" she cried. Alyssa dropped to her knees as fast as her body allowed and caught Ivy in her arms. The child buried her face in her mother's chest, sobbing openly now. Alyssa wrapped her arms around her, whispering through her own tears, "I'm here, baby. I'm here. I never stopped looking for you. Never." Clayton stood back, watching the reunion through eyes he could no longer keep dry. Megan, standing beside him, finally spoke for the first time in hours. "You did it." "No," Clayton said, voice thick. "She did." For the first time in a decade, the Harlow name had meant something good. And in that room, with a mother and daughter reunited against impossible odds, Clayton felt the first flicker of peace in years. But deep down, he also knew. There was one more thing left unfinished: Mason's death. And whoever had pulled the strings behind it all still hadn't answered for what they did. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Clayton's penthouse, casting soft golden light across the marble floors and sleek furniture. But inside the living room, everything was quiet. Ivy had fallen asleep, curled in her mother's arms on the couch, finally safe, her tiny body at peace for the first time in years. Alyssa sat upright, her fingers gently stroking Ivy's curls, as if still afraid that if she stopped touching her, she might vanish again. Clayton stood in the kitchen, watching them from a distance with a cup of black coffee in his hand. He hadn't slept, not because he was restless, but because the fire inside him hadn't gone out. Not since the moment he heard Mason's name whispered from a recording that never should have existed. Landon arrived shortly after sunrise. He stepped inside with a flash drive in hand and a grim expression. "I've got something. You're going to want to sit down for this." They moved into the office. Clayton locked the door behind them, even though part of him didn't want to keep anything from Alyssa. But what Landon had found could either bring justice or tear everything apart. Landon plugged the flash drive into the massive screen behind Clayton's desk. A video began to play. It was grainy surveillance footage, clearly old. It showed a young Mason Harlow, Clayton's brother, standing in what looked like a dimly lit office. The camera was angled awkwardly, like it had been hidden in a ceiling corner. Mason was pacing, talking to someone off screen. "I'm telling you, Gerald," Mason's voice echoed, low and urgent. "You can't keep doing this. These properties aren't just illegal, they're hiding people. Women, kids. You're using shell companies to launder everything. It's human trafficking." Clayton's jaw clenched as the voice of his father responded, cold and calm. "You've always been soft, Mason. You think being righteous makes you powerful? You're not strong enough to handle what I've built?" Mason stepped closer to the desk. "If you hurt Alyssa, if anything happens to her or the baby..." Then the screen went black. Landon paused it. "That was the last known footage of your brother, pulled from an encrypted drive hidden inside your father's private archive. Someone tried to erase it. Took me all night to restore what I could." Clayton stared at the frozen frame of his brother's face, rage simmering under his skin. "He confronted my father. He knew." Landon nodded. "Mason didn't die by accident. He was eliminated. Probably the same night. I also ran a deeper trace on David Merle, the guy from the recordings. He was your father's cleaner. Disappeared right after Mason. Resurfaced under a new name 3 states away. Want to guess where?" Clayton already knew. "Near the warehouse." "Bingo." Landon sat down across from him. "We can take this to the authorities. There's enough to open an investigation. But if we go public, it's not just your father's legacy that'll burn. It's the whole Harlow empire. Stockholders, partners, investors. You could lose everything." Clayton stared out the window for a long moment, the weight of the Harlow name pressing down on his shoulders like a vice. Everything he had built, The reputation, the fortune, the brand, stood on foundations soaked in silence. Then he looked back at Landon and said, "Then let it burn." He stood up, walked to the living room, and knelt beside Alyssa and Ivy. "There's something I need to tell you," he said gently, "and I think Ivy should hear it too." Alyssa looked at him, tense. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "Mason didn't die in an accident. He was murdered. My father had him killed for trying to protect you, for trying to stop what he discovered. And I just saw the proof." Alyssa's face crumbled. She covered her mouth in shock, but didn't speak. Ivy looked up at him, confused. "Uncle Mason was trying to save us?" Clayton nodded, his voice cracking. "He died to protect you, and now it's time the world knows the truth." Alyssa began to cry silently, pulling Ivy tighter into her arms. But this time the tears weren't only of pain. There was relief. There was justice stirring in them. Later that afternoon, Clayton called a press conference. When he stood before the cameras, he didn't wear a suit. He didn't open with a smile. He looked straight at the lens and began with a sentence that sent shockwaves through the entire industry. "My name is Clayton Harlow, and my father was a criminal." He didn't sugarcoat it. He revealed everything. Mason's death, Alyssa's disappearance, the trafficking front hidden behind the Harlow real estate empire, the warehouse, the files, the recordings. He released it all to the public. There was no script, no PR filter, just raw truth. And by the time he finished, the world had changed, but more importantly, so had he. In the weeks that followed Clayton's explosive press conference, the world reacted like a volcano finally forced to erupt. News outlets ran back-to-back headlines. "Billionaire exposes father's criminal empire," "Harlow legacy in flames," "Human trafficking front uncovered in luxury real estate scandal." Protesters gathered outside old Harlow buildings. Investigators reopened cold cases, and former employees came forward. People who had stayed silent out of fear now had a voice. The silence that had protected the Harlow dynasty for decades was shattered. But for Clayton, the chaos outside paled in comparison to the transformation inside his home. Alyssa began to recover, slowly. She spent her days in the sunroom of the penthouse, with Ivy often nestled against her, reading storybooks or helping water the plants Megan had brought in. She smiled more now. Her voice steadied. The bruises faded, but the shadows never quite left her eyes. One morning, as the light poured in through the tall windows, Clayton stepped into the sunroom with a folder in his hands. "I have something for you," he said. Alyssa looked up from the couch, where Ivy was drawing with crayons. "Another piece of terrible history?" she asked with a tired smile. "No," Clayton said, sitting beside her. "A future." He handed her the folder. Inside were official court documents, full legal custody of Ivy, a new identity for protection, and the deed to a small estate outside the city. It wasn't a palace, but it was quiet, safe, and entirely hers. Alyssa flipped through the pages in stunned silence. You did all this?" "I wanted to give you what Mason would have given you if he'd had the chance." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Clayton replied. "You already said enough when you survived." Ivy looked up at him and crawled into his lap, handing him her drawing. It was a crayon picture of 3 people holding hands under a giant sun. She had written their names above the figures in blocky letters. Mommy, me, Uncle Clayton. He swallowed hard. "You gave me back something I didn't know I was missing," he whispered. Later that evening, as the sky turned violet over the skyline, Clayton stood alone on the balcony, watching the city he had once ruled with silence now pulse with a strange new honesty. Landon joined him with 2 glasses of whiskey. "You know," Landon said, "you could have buried it, all of it, and no one would have known." "I would have known," Clayton said. "And she would have grown up thinking the world forgets people like her mother." He paused, then asked, "What's happening to Merle?" "FBI has him in custody. He's not saying much yet, but the paper trail your father left behind, it's not just one man. There's a whole network that's going down with him." "Good." They clinked glasses in quiet acknowledgement. Back inside, Ivy and Alyssa sat on the floor assembling a puzzle, the soft laughter of a child filling the once silent halls of Clayton's home. He turned to watch them, and something settled inside him. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but peace. In the days that followed, Alyssa and Ivy moved into their new home. They didn't say goodbye. Instead, they left a small wooden box on Clayton's desk. Inside was the phone that had started it all. On the screen was a final message. Dear Uncle Clayton, thank you for listening. Thank you for saving Mommy. Love, Ivy. Clayton placed the phone in his safe, not to hide it, but to protect it. It was no longer evidence. It was a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with a war, but with a whisper from a little girl who dared to say, "That phone isn't yours." In my view, the ending of this story is a powerful and deeply emotional culmination of justice, redemption, and the resilience of love. It began with a lost phone and a whisper, something so small, so easy to overlook. But it unraveled a legacy of buried crimes and generational silence. That's what made the conclusion feel not only satisfying, but necessary. Clayton's transformation from a cold, untouchable billionaire into a man willing to lose everything for the truth is the emotional backbone of the story. He didn't just rescue Alyssa and Ivy, he rescued a part of himself that had been dormant since his brother's death. The moment he chose to speak out, knowing it would destroy the empire he inherited, was when he truly became his own man. Not a shadow of his father, but the brother Mason always believed he could be. Alyssa and Ivy's reunion is tender and deserved, but what makes it even more meaningful is that they didn't just find safety, they found acknowledgement. They were no longer invisible victims hidden behind corporate walls. They were seen, heard, and protected. That, to me, is what real justice looks like. And finally, Ivy's simple thank you, both through the drawing and the final message, ties the entire story together with quiet grace. It reminds us that children often see the truth adults are too distracted to notice. Her bravery, innocence, and trust are what saved them all. This was a heavy story filled with trauma and darkness, but it ended in light. Not perfection, not fairy tale happiness, but real earned peace. And that makes it beautiful.